Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Michelle Accardi from Liongard. Michelle, welcome.
Thanks, Sugata. It's great to be here.
I know we've been going back and forth for a while to get this finally done, so I'm so glad you're here.
I am too. It's crazy. We're in event season for the MSP community and ecosystem. So been on the road a lot. So it's great to finally catch up.
Yeah, I've been watching you on LinkedIn and other places for sure. So before we get going, I think it'll be amazing if you'd please take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself and the company.
Sure thing. So I'm Michelle Accardi. I'm the CEO of Liongard. Liongard is a cybersecurity SaaS platform that helps MSPs and MSSPs to be able to automate their asset discovery, asset inventory, see what's changing in the configuration state of those assets, give them real asset intelligence to help them understand where vulnerabilities might be and help them to get ahead of the risks, as opposed to just waiting for the risks to happen.
That's pretty cool. How about also talk a little bit about yourself? You have had an amazing journey. So maybe you can start there, and I have a bunch of questions tied to that.
So previous to being CEO of Liongard, I had the great pleasure of being CEO of a PE-backed roll-up MSP called Logically, where we acquired 14 different companies, including an MSSP, and really took a cybersecurity focus into managed services. So that gave me a great deal of knowledge, grew that to roughly 100 million. Previous to that, ran a UCaaS company called Star Communications, exited that for just around 500 million, which was quite a journey as well. Took that company from 13 million to just about 100 million as well, to that great exit. So lots of experience, and I'll call it that sort of startup and founder world. And then previous to that, 17 years at CA Technologies, now Broadcom, and had the great pleasure of sort of growing up in the technology.com era and then through to where we are today. So it's been an exciting career, and one that I've built around partners and the channel ecosystem. So it's just good to see how this has continued to evolve over the last 25 years.
So I have a couple of questions. a couple of dimensions tied to, the journey that you have had. So when you look at the scale-ups that you went through, maybe you can kind of walk through what were the similarities, across those scale-ups, and what actually changed from a partnership ecosystem channel-wise as you went from a telco to a service provider and etc.
Yeah. So one of the things is that, even when I was at Star, we never viewed ourselves as a telco. We always viewed ourselves as a software company first. And we viewed MSPs as the right channel. So a lot of telcos were focused on going after the technology service broker, agent community, what used to be known as master agents. And we really looked at it as, gosh, the people who are closest to the customers are really these managed service providers. So we really enabled and thought about the channel in that way around how do we empower growth through MSPs. And, then when I sat on the other side of the table being an MSP, and learning how MSPs get valued, which is generally via their EBITDA. So their profit margin becomes very, very important. You realize that you can drive profit in one of two ways. You can do it through growth, or you can EBITDA improvement through, cost cutting efforts. So what I think in both environments, when I was at Star, I was giving them a tool, something that they could sell and generate more revenue, so they didn't have to cut their way to a good EBITDA margin. And that even follows through to now what I'm doing here at Liongard. Ultimately, we're helping MSPs become more efficient, but we're also giving them something that they can prove value to their customers and then sell. So therefore driving that level of profit margin, which is, again, how MSPs get valued.
So service providers have always been around, in the IT ecosystem, but this whole category called managed service providers or managed security service providers sort of started, 20, 25 years ago and evolved quite a bit. And I'd love to kind of look at that evolution through your lenses. Like, where do you think the category was as a service provider, a couple of decades ago, 10 years ago, and where is it now?
It started as VARs, right? Folks who were essentially, moving boxes, right? I mean, they were selling Dells and HPs, and ultimately it became what value added services could you put on top of that, and that wound up being software, right? And so, and needing to secure that, then that evolved into the securing of that software, of that software and that hardware. So you've really seen this go from one-time product sales to then added services and then software that's creating new service categories. And now with AI, it's a whole new ball game around where that opportunity can continue to grow to. But ultimately, those who've sort of capitalized on the ability to get to recurring revenue, and that's the real difference, is that recurring versus one-time revenue is where MSPs and MSSPs can really drive value.
So when you go back to your Logically experience, right, the 16 roll-ups that you kind of did, were they roughly the same or where the distribution was wide? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, it was, again, it was really great experience for me. Ultimately, we did acquire MSPs of different scale. Almost all of them had EBITDA. I would say actually all of them had EBITDA, and were, good businesses. So that's one of the things that I would say is, if you're looking to, if you're an MSP who happens to be listening to this podcast, get your good fundamentals in place, because if you do eventually want to be acquired and be acquired for a good multiple, if you have your fundamentals right, and you've built a business where, again, you've got good profit margins and you're growing, or have the capacity to grow, that's where you're going to get the best return on the work that you've done.
Can you talk a little bit about the metrics? Like, what is a good profit margin? What are sort of good sort of numbers?
Yeah, I mean,
what's the typical size of this organization?
Look, the rule of 40, while that's a software metric, is really the same for the services business, right? You want to be as close to, being able to be at, and if for those of you who aren't familiar with rule of 40, essentially it just means that either you're at 40% growth and zero profit margin, or you're at 20% profit margin and 20% growth, but how you get to that 40 essentially. And I think that, when I look across MSPs in general, there's quite a few that still aren't turning that profit and also aren't growing. So you need to really focus on, again, where are the fundamentals of your business that you can press into. If you've got a good customer base, then, how can you add services and such that will enable you to get to an even better profit margin? And where can you look at your stack and your people and make sure that you've dialed that in for an efficiency standpoint. Ultimately, I think those companies that are, in the 15 to 20% EBITDA and 15 to 20% on the growth engine, those are the ones that are going to get the most for their businesses.
So what, from a success factor wise, I did a podcast with Tim Conkle from the 20 MSP, and he was covering from his perspective, but I'd like to kind of hear from you. Like, what were the success attributes then? Are they the same now? Like, if an MSP is thinking about their business today and forward, like, what are the 4 or 5 key parameters they need to focus on outside the rule of 40?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's, are you running efficiently, right? And how do you get to efficiency? And there's multiple ways to do that, right? You can automate using a multitude of tools. There's agentic AI that's helping today. There's the ability for you to leverage resources nearshore, offshore, and think differently about your business. But again, how do you get to efficiency? I think that is one of the most critical things, that you just you can't hire your way out of. Making sure that you have the right people in place and then that right tool set to automate your business. I think that's the first key fundamental for an MSP to have in place. But it always starts with right people. Like, what's your core value prop, and who are the best people for you to be able to deliver that. And then ultimately, it's everything you put into your tech stack. How do you monetize? Because I think that that's one of the things that MSPs don't do right often. We all love to test and play with new technology, but we don't always think that we can monetize it to our customer base. And ultimately, I think that that's the most critical thing that MSPs need to think about is every dollar you spend, how are you making that dollar into four? And, providing extra value to your customers.
When someone is trying to change their business, it's easier to build something or augment your business if there are greenfield opportunities versus in a brownfield, because you're fighting out with somebody else and trying to displace, right? It can be done, but it's always harder. Yeah. But from a greenfield perspective, if an MSP is listening to this conversation, few millions in revenue, maybe a few hundred customers, 10, 20 people, where do you think, are there practice sectors that they can focus on where things are changing? Therefore, they can go into a customer and say, hey, I know you have another service provider, but please take a look at me.
Yeah, well, I think the first things that MSPs need to do, and this is going to sound very rudimentary, but so many MSPs I talk to today don't actually understand what their customers even have, right? So the first thing that the MSP needs to do is really take inventory of what assets does that customer really have. And, from there, you can find a wealth of information around what other services you should be able to sell in. Now, self-servingly, I'll tell you that from a security standpoint and an IT automation standpoint, they can leverage a tool like Liongard to help them with that. And then also then sell in, hey, this is what it means to have change management or to have the cybersecurity sort of left of boom capabilities of attack surface management. But you can find a wealth of information when you actually understand how your customers' environments are changing on a daily, monthly, yearly basis, and help them to rationalize their own IT and security spending. That's one of the core areas that, again, sounds very rudimentary and probably unsexy, but actually is where the money is found in MSPs.
Makes a lot of sense. So if you come back to Liongard, is there, who is your ICP from an end customer perspective, and then go to market perspective? Who's your ideal partner from a managed services perspective?
Yeah. So we sell to and through MSPs and MSSPs. And ultimately, we look at MSPs that have more than 20 customers are within our ICP. But the more customers you have, the more complexity you have, the more difficulty you have in understanding what's in that asset inventory and what could change that could create risk. Those are the ones that are the best fit for Liongard. And those who want to automate. If you're still in a very manual process and you're not ready to make the leap to automation and to leveraging AI, like people leverage Liongard not only for the cybersecurity aspects of it, but because we're able to do AI generated asset summaries so that the account managers or VCSOs or VCIOs have information right at their fingertips to be able to, talk intelligently to their customers about what's happening in their environment. It's very powerful capability. And we see a lot of our MSPs who are now, as they're moving to agentic, right, or trying to make that leap, they need a source of truth. And because Liongard is playing across 90 plus different integrations in the IT space, essentially that source of truth is Liongard that then they can automate on top of, whether that's with, AI or RPA.
Going back to that rule of 40 metrics that you mentioned, both you and I have been sort of in the SaaS world, and we know repeatability matters, right? So once you know sort of your ICP and you kind of figure out average revenue per customer, the acquisition cost, then you can build an engine, right? So going back to Liongard, do you see a sweet spot where the MSPs are lined up? Like, is it 100 seats? Is it 1,000 seats? It's certain sectors in a vertical. Like, where do you see the momentum?
Yeah. Well, again, we find that those MSPs that are in the roll up mode, whether that's Entiva or SourcePass, Miraplex, et cetera, those are the kinds of companies who are starting to build and standardize on Liongard. Ultimately, there are anyone who again is sort of in that wanting to grow and needing visibility across. That is where we play. We also find that in regulated industries, again, where there are MSPs who are handling financial services, or we're also finding in schools. So we're uniquely we don't just give visibility across Microsoft. But we also do it for Google Workspace and such. So where there needs to be a very economical way to monitor what's changing and the vulnerabilities, we're finding that MSPs who've got traction in those spaces are leveraging us as well.
I know you've been traveling a lot to a lot of these shows, and I also see, you're trying to recruit. So can you go kind of walk us through the process from onboarding, enablement, co-market, co-sell? How do you work with your partners?
Yeah. So, again, first of all, we try to give back to the community first. So we go to about, I don't know, it's 65, 70 shows a year. And in those shows, it's less about, for us, about, I'll say, generating the demand. It's about going out and giving back to the customer. So meaning, we're doing sessions, we're, speaking, we're doing in coaching cafes, we're coaching. We're really trying to, help give our experience back to the MSPs, because we're a very MSP driven software company. The founders, Joe and Vin, they were MSPs. Obviously, I was an MSP. A lot of our sales team comes from that background or from the other big vendors in the MSP space. So we sort of try to start from the sort of go-giver framework. Once we've engaged with you at a show or what have you, we'll invite you to get a discovery call, learn what we do. If it's of interest to you, you can either onboard right away, or we can do proof of concepts as well. But for once you get into the onboarding process, it's generally 3 to 5 together collaborative sessions where we walk through onboarding. We get you set up on the use cases that matter to you, because Liongard's a very broad platform. So there are some people who are like, look, I need help with my Microsoft environments. I need to monitor all of them, but I'm not worried about firewalls or endpoints. I've got that in other places. Or it could be the reverse. Hey, I'm worried about auditing my firewalls and what have you. So we really focus in on where are the use cases that matter. Some it's billing reconciliation, being able to do that. For others, it's Microsoft remediations and such. So we really focus in on those and then deliver the value based on the use cases that matter to the MSP that we're working with. And then there's, monthly, quarterly check-ins with our account management team. We're constantly doing webinars, and we have a Liongard Academy that we host as well. So right now we're also doing these great things that we call uncaged dinners across the country, where we essentially get together a group of 20 to 40 MSPs over dinner, and we talk about the real world issues that are happening and to MSPs, how Liongard can help, of course. But we also love to connect MSPs to other technologies and people who can help them in the industry. So we try to, again, be just very involved in the ecosystem and make it about the MSP and not about us.
That's quite amazing. So, Michelle, I want to go to the other dimension on the go-to-market side, which is sort of alliances, because you said you have 90 plus integrations. Can you talk to a little bit about, how did you build that? Like, how did you figure out who to integrate with? What was the logical sequence of it? Are you still adding more? And then how do you play with them? Like, how do you work with them?
Yeah, for sure. It's and look, that in many ways that's been our secret sauce is the fact that we have such broad integrations. And it started again with this sense of community and going where the MSPs were, which started with ConnectWise and then moved to Kaseya and moved to Synchro and moved to going across all of the different PSAs first, and then moving into the RMMs, and then from there moving into all of the different firewall and server vendors, and keeping up with all of those relationships is a task, right? We have to have product management very embedded in working with those teams to stay ahead of changes those technical alliances may make. Ultimately, I think we do a pretty good job of it, in terms of, again, trying to stay ahead of it and being engaged. But a lot of it, again, goes back to being involved in the ecosystem. Like when we're at a show, we don't just go talk to MSPs, but we take note of who else are the MSPs talking to, who's gaining market share, where do they want us to be engaged. And we have our own product feedback mechanism where we take what the MSPs say they want as the next level of integrations, and then we look out obviously proactively around what we think would provide additional value. Like this month, for example, we have a CrowdStrike inspector that's coming out, because we're seeing, while that hadn't been a big technology in the MSP space in the past, now more MSPs are moving into the MSSP world, and CrowdStrike's becoming more of a vendor that's necessary. So, working in that way.
So one area, people have been sort of writing about, at least recently, about this whole notion of shadow AI, right? Like in the older days was bring your own devices. Now people are bringing their own AI. So I know the sort of asset management wise, people have focused on hard devices. And I guess the people get managed through other HRM system. Where are the AI tools going to be managed? Like they're neither here nor there. The agents, are they going to be an agent management platform?
I think it's very well could be. Ultimately, I think where the way that we look at it is via identities, right? And what's getting access to the systems of record that matter to you, and do you have the asset inventory around the identities as well as the software and the hardware and usage? But I mean, ultimately, it's anyone's guess as to like who will own that within the but ultimately, I think what matters is who's going to get access to the underlying data that is of importance to your. And so understanding who has what identities and what do they have access to that's important to your, and being able to track that and what's changing in those systems, I think is almost more important than because it's where the data goes to, right? Ultimately, if the person has access, you got to manage that identity and manage their access, and not be as worried about the AI getting it as to have you given the right people the access, and have you controlled that appropriately?
So are you thinking about incorporating any of those functionalities in your platform, or you think it'll happen through some sort of a partnership with a third-party provider?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer. I mean, I think that we are certainly going to recognize and automate, again, any new software that comes into a system that, so I think from that perspective, yes, but how deep that will go at this stage for us, I'm not sure. I don't know that that's my use case to sell and solve. I would think that's likely a partner use case for us.
So where are you? Are there specific categories from a Gen AI perspective or ML perspective? Are you incorporating technology in your stack, or?
Oh, for sure. So we're going to be creating our own MCP server to be able to help MSPs who, again, want to use Liongard as the source of truth to surface results for their customers in a very easy way. So we actually launched a product called Answer IQ, and we're essentially, you'll be able to use natural language search within Liongard to answer any question that the data that we have in our massive data lake. So imagine the ability to very quickly, type in, what customers do I have that don't have MFA enabled? What, what ultimately what ports might be open on a firewall that could be giving me risk. Just being able to use natural language to get to that. Today we already have an AI query builder that uses natural language, but in Q4 the new natural language search will be there. And again, the ability to solve problems for customers, in an instant, or to democratize the data for account management, because that's one of the biggest problems that at least when I was running my MSP, ultimately, I would have sales and account people who would be like, hey, can go to my service delivery team and be like, hey, I need data on this. I'm going to go meet with this customer. Well, now I'm interrupting actual service delivery to go run these kinds of reports. Whereas within a Liongard, that account manager can have access to all of that data. It's, we have these AI asset summaries. We have the ability to use the natural language search query. And now, in Q4, this Answer IQ to have the natural language search. So they can just go in and see that and surface it without needing a technical power user.
So going back to a few minutes ago, you talked about managed service providers are now they're interested in providing AI enabled or AI services or even management services. Where are you getting the questions from? Where the interests are, and what do you think is real, kind of a 12, 18 month horizon?
Yeah. So I think, a lot of them are starting with, I'll call it the Microsoft use cases of like, hey, let me show you how to leverage Copilot, right? I think a lot of them are starting there with, in terms of what services they're offering to their customers. So I think it's in its infancy. What I see happening for the more sophisticated MSPs are that they're, again, understanding that they need to actually use AI to provide better service to their customers. And they're starting there, not starting at what's the additional service to the customer. It's like, how do I create a better service so that then I can spend my time thinking about additional new services. And so again, this whole idea of leveraging a source of truth and being able to mine the data they have to find new offerings. I think that's the first place where, again, the more sophisticated MSPs are going. And then, again, layering on top the, how to use AI in your business for their customers, whether that's Copilot or, going back to my sort of UCAS days, like ultimately, it's adding in AI to, different use cases, leveraging text messaging, for example, like automation of, I'll use the restaurant industry, for example, new AI bots that answer the phone and take an order and set by sending out a text message, right? To say, hey, to solve, so those are the kinds of automations and such I'm seeing some of the MSPs start to drive.
That makes a lot of sense. So I have a couple of follow-on questions on those. So if you go back to keeping aside the Answer IQ, which you're enabling your partner to a knowledge base, if you think about from a segment perspective, whether SMB or mid-market, where your partners are focused on, are there verticals like what you just said, retail or hospitality, where are you seeing partners are integrating, not just using AI within their business, but any offers as a bundle?
Yeah. Again, what I'm seeing, not yet in terms of I am not seeing a lot of MSPs put together the bundle offers and such. I'm seeing them do it again around horizontal use cases, around Copilot and such. There are, again, some very niche players that are doing some things for legal, for the legal vertical, sort of similar to what I was just talking about for the restaurant and hospitality industry. I've seen some of those that are in that particular vertical that are doing some things, but it's not widespread yet. I think it will be, though. I think that's the next play once MSPs leverage AI to first make themselves efficient.
And Andreessen Horowitz, they invested into a sort of conversational application, and that company completely pivoted into the automotive sector because 40% of the oil changes apparently don't happen on time, and it's lost revenue. So, and it's because of scheduling issues, right? Because people have to pick up the phone, call somebody, and then reschedule. So now they just speak to a bot. Are there, from a service delivery perspective, are you seeing anything between the service provider, the managed service provider, and their end customer, similar applications of any kind where they're trying to become more efficient?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, again, I think the efficiency of essentially being able to have a chat GPT like interface where a person's now not necessarily even creating a ticket, so to speak, but it's self-service, solve your own problem, and then escalate to technician. And that's what we're seeing MSPs wanting to leverage tools like Liongard underneath to do. That's something that is, I think first line, right? And I'll also tell you, like, I was in Vegas this last week, and I happened to stay at the Rio Hotel. They don't have any humans essentially that are answering the phone anymore or handling anything tied to the rooms. Ultimately, they have a phone bot called Rita, and Rita does everything from the reservations to if you have a maintenance issue in your room, like my water wasn't working appropriately. And literally I had to talk to Rita to get my maintenance person. And now it worked pretty seamlessly. But I'm seeing it very clearly in the hospitality industry starting to happen. I think we'll start to see it in all these different industries. Like I said, I've heard about it in legal from a scheduling standpoint. I think it'll be the same for financial services for scheduling, but we're seeing more and more of that for sure. Any of these, I'll say, any margin constrained business, I think you're going to see it faster in those industries, like the retail industries and the hospitality industries. You see the uptake on those kinds of automations more quickly because they're tighter in their margins.
Yeah, and for example, our office network over here is managed by a local partner, a managed services partner. And a few times that has happened, salespeople said, "Oh, my Wi-Fi is not connecting; it's dropping." So we have to go log a ticket. Then somebody has to call in, check, and etc. I would think they're like basic tasks that get requested by customers all day long across their front line, right?
I think that's the first. Again, that's the first use case that I'm seeing out of every MSP that's, again, more sophisticated or moving up the chain in AI. They're starting with, how do I solve these, very common issues that don't really require a tier 2 or tier 3 tech, that literally, automate some of that piece. While I never like to say there's not a place for entry level engineers, because ultimately I think there's a lot of value to that. But I do think that that's one of the biggest risk areas, because AI has the ability, I think, leveraging that kind of tech to, potentially take the place of that. And this is where MSPs have to make the choice, and in some cases of how much do you want to automate versus have human touch on something to be your differentiator. And I think in some MSPs, humanity may be the differentiator than the tech. But I also think that almost every MSP is going to have to automate leveraging AI in order to compete, to get to the profit margins that they need to have in order to be valued the way that I'm sure they all want to be.
If you look at the talent pool, over the last couple of decades on the tech side, and you have Googles and Microsoft of the world, they went to Stanfords and MITs. Then you look at, the next layers of vendors, they went to tier 2, tier 3 colleges. And then you look at the service provider, they predominantly went to community colleges to recruit, right? And that's where the frontline support kind of, came around. And one other thing on a parallel basis that has happened is that the entire PSA industry evolved, right? So ConnectWise and Autotask and Tiger, I don't know how many of them are out there today. But those actually created jobs. They did not eliminate, even though automation came around on the PSA side, but talent got recruited because a new category got created, right? Called managed services. How do you see it's playing out with the agents are now coming in? Like, what is happening in the PSA world? Are they augmenting those with agents? And would they require these entry-level talent? Or are they going to provide agents that will not require entry-level talent?
Yeah, I think there are two paths, right? I think that some of them are going to do the agentic thing that is going to replace talent. I think others are going to create new paradigms in which there could be entry level talent that is, again, taking a different place in that value stream. Essentially, it might be an approval, people who actually look to better train the models and such, and leveraging that talent to do that. But I don't think it's one flavor. I think it's going to be both flavors that happen. I do think that the lower skilled workers are certainly going to be the ones most at risk. I think, top tier talent is still going to be needed. I don't think AI is going to solve for every edge case. And in the MSP world, the edge case is is oftentimes where we get to prove our biggest value, because it's the complexity that a model can't necessarily solve easily, because it's not something that's necessarily seen over and over and over again. So I think those people who have the critical thinking skills to manage in those complex environments and to solve problems in those ways will not be replaceable by AI.
Michelle, you're a parent. I'm a parent. We have kids, and we always worry about what's going to happen to their future, right? So I want to go back to education. I know it's not related to what you and I do every day, but we think about it every day, right? So when I'm involved with my school at the computer science level, they're thinking about how to train and retrain or get the kids ready in this world that they're coming to. And traditionally, most four-year, engineering colleges, they basically taught you theories and some applications. And then you had trade school where you where you got your hard trade skills, right? Application oriented. Do you think because of this knowledge is now free and you can learn on your own, this 4-year curricula where we waste the first 2 years, like doing general stuff, do they need to think differently so that the last 2 years they're actually working and gaining the world knowledge, maybe for free, they're not getting paid for it. So when someone is looking for a new hire, they're not called, you're fresh out of school, you have 2 years of experience.
Yeah, I think it starts even long before then, right? That education is ripe for an overhaul. I recently listened to a podcast from the CEO of Alpha Schools. I don't know if you've heard of Alpha Schools,
yes.
But essentially, they're really setting education on its ear, because they started with the premise that first, kids have to love school. And I don't know about your kids, but that's not necessarily how my kids feel about school. But they start with that premise, and then they focus on getting the kids to do the hard stuff for 2 hours a day, and to really learn. And then the rest of the day, the other, 4 to 6 hours of school that is a day, they focus on real life experience. Like the CEO was talking about the fact that, for example, to teach public speaking, they took the kids to a press junket after a football game. And then they got to actually pretend that they were the ones being interviewed, and they actually had real reporters interviewing them. And what a better way to get kids to engage and to learn a good awesome life skills starting much younger. And I think that if our education system doesn't start applying real world experience to kids much sooner, you know, I think, you know, it's going to be a real deficit for the United States in the future. So I think that real world experience is more important, frankly, than a lot of the book work, because let's face it, the AI can answer a lot of those questions now. So the kids don't necessarily need to feel as dependent on their own knowledge of things, but instead in teaching them the curiosity to go get the answers, and the curiosity to understand how to solve the problems. And that I don't think that they'll get that passion and that curiosity without some of that real world experience. And I have to tell you, I do it for my own 17-year-old works 3 days a week, because I believe real world experience is, again, much more valuable, much that is more hands-on is going to be the key to success.
So I want to sort of come back to you. I started with you in the beginning. I want to come back to you. So if you look back, you know, this amazing journey that you have had, you know, multiple successes that you've gone through, what you did change. And so if you kind of go back to, you know, your earlier self and have the experience of these changes that you made, but know what's coming in front of you is pretty uncertain. And you're starting as a 22-year-old. What would you tell yourself? How do you start? How do you sort of manage this journey forward? What skills are you going to go build, and what skills are you going to say, you know, those are disposable. I'm just going to pick it up along the way.
Yeah. So I still say your network is your net worth. And when I was young, I was all about getting the task done. Like I was always a GSD. Let's just go run really hard and solve every problem that you can. But I didn't understand the value of people. And oftentimes felt like I was competing in my work environment. And that was sort of a CA way. We were a very competitive group of people. And I think I missed opportunities, not understanding that I could build a network and a community and relationships. Thankfully, by the time I was 30, I sort of found my way in that. But I think I probably wasted a decade with not understanding the importance that the relationships, and it's not a technical skill. It's granted it's a soft skill, but ultimately every problem I've ever needed to solve along the journey took humans, and it took the building up of humans, not the breaking down of humans. And I think it took me longer to understand that, frankly, that, you know, ultimately it's not about how far and hard you can push people, but how much you can inspire them to go be above and beyond where they even thought they ever could. And ultimately, I don't know that that's a skill you teach or gets taught in school or what have you, but kindness, paying it forward, helping, being in service to others. I think that's the most important skill set, and it's missing today in many organizations. You know, we have our eye on the prize of growth and, you know, profitability, but not on the growth and profitability of people. So I think that is a skill that I would have invested in myself much earlier in my career. And then secondarily, you know, again, there were finance skills that I think, you know, understanding the economics of things and why. Like oftentimes when you work in a business, if you're not a C-level executive and you see decisions being made around you, you may not necessarily understand why those decisions are being made because you don't understand the economics of business. And it becomes much easier to understand and get ahead of like where the puck is going if you understand what the economic drivers are. So I think even an engineer needs to take finance classes, even a salesperson, especially a salesperson, needs to you know, really understand how and why things work in a business financially. So those are the skills that I would have liked to have had more of. And you know, again, just teaching people to be more curious about everything. I think that's the thing that has made me successful over my career is I don't claim to know everything. I claim to be curious about everything.
Well, with that amazing note, Michelle, I want to thank you. It's been an amazing discussion. I'd love to have you back because this space will continue to change and you have a lot of wisdom and insight to offer. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Sugata.